Hey Ryan, how do I get project-based learning started at my school? I've gotten some form of this question nearly every day for the last decade from engaged educators just like you. So at Magnify Learning, we've created a free download to get you started. Whether you're a superintendent, principal, coach, or teacher, go to whatispbl.com to get started on your project-based learning journey today. Are you ready to bring project-based learning to your school? The PBL Simplified podcast will help equip you for your PBL journey with weekly need-to-knows, engaging interviews, PBL showcases from facilitators in the classroom, and PBL leadership episodes to move you towards a successful implementation of PBL. Because every learner deserves to be a part of an inspiring story, and we see daily that project-based learning helps make this happen. If you want me to answer your PBL need-to-know on the podcast, visit whatispbl.com and click on Ask Ryan to submit your question. Welcome to the PBL Simplified podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Stoyer. This is episode 109. It's a leadership guest episode. We've got Adam Drummond on, who poses the question, how do we reach 100% of our learners? And I like the question. I think it's a great way to frame your work. It's a great way to look at your work. And especially now, as we approach the end of the year and you've got some goals, if you didn't put your goals down on paper, go back to episode 106 and I'll help you do that, because you need to have real goals and you need to have ones that work for you. You need goals that are not a to-do list. You need a passion list, ones that you really want to go after, ones that you can get excited about so others can get excited about them with you. So I hope you have those goals set. If you don't, I'd love to help you with those. Again, that's episode 106 to do that. Before we get into our interview with Adam, I want to hit our need to know. Our need to know for today is, how do we make sure we're implementing PBL with fidelity? It's a great question. It comes from a school that at Magnify Learning, we just started working with them, and they're on fire. They're absolutely in the right spot. They've got fantastic facilitators. And now they're trying to take it to the next level with project-based learning. They're trying to bring in PLCs. So they're excited. And their question comes from, what if we're not like 100% on the right side of the rubric as we implement? And I like the question because when you first start doing project-based learning at your school, those first followers, the early majority, those first PBL units that come out will start to define project-based learning for your school. So it is important to look at those aspects and say, this is really great. Here's some areas of growth, right? We should have a growth mindset. So whatever PBL unit we put out there, even if you've been doing PBL for a decade, I would tell you those facilitators that have been are still going to ask for feedback in areas of growth when they have an expo. Right? Anytime I come in, there's, hey Ryan, what do you think we could add to this? What would you tweak? Because if we're really doing this work well and we're living the process, we're not going to have a perfect PBL unit. We're always going to be growing. And that's what I think you want to bring as you look at these first units that your teachers start to create, is you want to say, yes, these are really great. You crushed this part of it. That's authentic PBL. And you don't want to totally crush and say, we're not going to call this PBL, because they're just starting out, right? Like, it's a new grip. So let me give you a couple of analogies. Like, one, I go to sports. So like, if you're on a basketball team and you're running a new play, you run that new play. It's not going to be perfect the first time, but you don't just give up on it, right? You say, hey, this part worked well. Let's continue this. And maybe you run some drills around the part that wasn't so great. In the same way, as you see your PBL units launched, maybe you run some workshops around where you have areas of growth. And if you are going to look for things in PBL units as they start to launch, I think the authenticity is probably the most important part. I shouldn't say probably. The authenticity is the most important part. If you have an authentic PBL unit, the rest of it tends to work itself out. Right? If your kids are really solving a real-world problem in the community, then it tends to work itself out. You'll do the workshops, you'll hit the standards, you'll have the engagement. So look for the authenticity, applaud the authenticity when you see it. Put some tuning protocols in that push everybody towards authenticity. But have grace in this process, right? If you've just done a PBL jumpstart, you just started. Like, your teachers are doing PBL for the first time, right? Like, that's not easy. And Seth Godin has a really great book. It's short. It's called The Dip. And I think in education, we kind of freak out when we hear the dip, right? I don't expect you to have a dip in your standardized tests and your grades and your learning. Like you can protect those things through PLCs and through quizzes, tests, benchmarks, those types of things. But you are going to have a point where, and Seth talks about this, that when you start something new, there's this momentum and energy around it, and the graph actually goes up and to the right. And then you start to realize that, hey, this works hard. This is difficult. And the graph kind of dips down a little bit. And that's what he starts to talk about is what do you do in that dip? When you get in that dip, you have a choice of either, hey, this isn't the right thing and I quit. I'm going to do something different, which can be okay, right? If it's not what you're meant to do. But this PBL work, like you're committed, you're in. So you're going to have some initial momentum and energy, excitement. And then, hey, wait a minute, this is difficult work, which is true. And you need some more professional development. You need energy around it. You need, reading workshops. You need to support your staff in that dip to help them through it. And then as they do that, they're going to gain confidence. They had the courage to start, the confidence to get through the dip. And then once they're at the top, you have compassion to come back and train others. That's part of my life's mission is I help you live your best life with courage, confidence, and compassion. And those are really my words. They're not Seth's, but I would recommend just grab the book. It's called The Dip by Seth Godin. And it's about when you start something new, you've got the energy and then it starts to dip and you need to help your folks through that dip to get to confidence where they're creating on their own. And the way we do that at Magnify Learning is we offer that second year. We offer that PBL advanced training, and that's what we're doing. We're saying, hey, you've implemented for a year. Let's look at the 6 A's. Let's look at what high-quality, authentic PBL is. Revamp your past PBL unit, and let's create another PBL unit. Let's create a curriculum map for you. And that's what we do in that second year. So that second year training is really important for that exact reason. It gets your staff through the dip, and it protects the fidelity of project-based learning in your school. So you've had the jump start, you've started. That advanced is the one that gets you to the next level. So again, thank you for the need to know. Appreciate those. Get your need to know on the podcast by going to whatispbl.com and then click on Ask Ryan. But right now, let's jump into our interview with Adam Drummond. Well, welcome PBL Simplified audience. Super excited that you joined us today. We've got a guest with us again today, as you know. So we've got Dr. Adam Drummond with us, and we've got him in between training sessions. So we just kind of snagged him while he's out and about. He's got a lot of things going on. He's got a great about page. Like if you just want to know him, it's all there. And it's everything from elementary teacher to middle school to principal. He's done a little bit of everything. So Adam, thanks for being with us.
Ryan, thanks for having me. It's certainly a pleasure to be talking with you about the great work that educators are doing across the country as it relates to project-based learning and making sure that students have real-life experiences in unpredictable situations. That's really what they need to do after they graduate, no matter what workforce industry they go into. So it's great to be with you all today.
Yeah, Adam, and we've got to get into some questions, but on your site, adamdrummond.com, you can go. One of my favorite things here, and we're going to get into 100% of the kids, 100% of the time real quick, but just in your opening, it says, we are blessed to be in the education profession. We're the only profession where we have impact on 3 generations each day. The students we serve, their parents, and the students' future children. I love the generational aspect of that. I love the positivity of that. Like, how is that message resonating in schools right now where, kind of post-COVID, we've got, man, this is hard. It's harder than before. Is that true? And then how is your message resonating with people right now?
Yeah, I think, for a lot of folks, they've never really thought about the impact that their work has that way. I was talking with a group of educators in the Northeast part of the country. And, when children go through educational experiences and they graduate and they start their own families, and then they have children and those children start school, their influence comes from their parents. And that influence comes from when those parents were kids. And so if a child graduates from a PK 12 setting and then has their own children and had a positive experience overall, then they're going to have a positive affirmation to their own children about education. But if they had struggles and didn't feel that they had formed relationships with adults or that adults didn't treat them fairly, and then they grow up and they have children, then that's going to have an adverse effect on those kids going through. They're already thinking about, how is this system not going to help me because it didn't help my mom or dad as well. So, when we really think about from a longitudinal perspective, we really do have quite the impact that can impact generations and generations.
Yeah, I love that. I love that generational aspect. I think about that in other areas of my life. And when I read that in your bio, I was just like, I'm not sure I've applied it to our work like that. But, we've got our learners in the classroom, and it's like, they don't necessarily value education because their parents didn't value education, right? Because like you said, the system didn't work for them, whatever the reason is, and we can turn that around. So I love that message that you're bringing, which probably delves into our first question. What is your why for being in education?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I knew I wanted to be in education since I was in first grade. And, it really came to the fact that my principal, Mr. Robert Trout, made being a principal look fun, right? I mean, I went to school, I had a positive impact on the teachers that were around me. They made me feel like I was capable to do anything. I had positive experiences. Mr. Trout was very profound in just, what does it look like to be a principal? And so for me, that was just the only career option. I never had really thought about, like, what does it actually mean when you get in, right? Like, you never think about, okay, right. Like, okay, I'm actually in charge of these, 18 little third graders. That's where I started my career. And you really are, in a lot of times, not given the resources per se, because you don't really know what to do. I mean, you go through the classes and you do your student teaching, and then it's like, okay, here they are, go change the world.
Yeah.
And, I think for me, that's the piece, is every day is that opportunity. And it's why I want to be in education. I have 3 personal children, and, today is November 8th when we're recording this. And my daughter gets 1 November 8th in 2nd grade. My 7th grade son gets 1 November 8th, 2022 in 7th grade. And my high school senior son gets his last pre-K-12 experience on November 8th of this year. And by golly, I want it to be the very best experience that it can be, because they only get one of them. And then tomorrow is a new day. And so I really want to make sure that we send the message that every day is a new day and we need to be the best day possible. The first day should be just as exciting as the 57th day, as the 130th day, as the last day of school.
Yeah, I absolutely love it, Adam. So I love the positivity that you're bringing, and I love that you're bringing it all across the country. So you've got this phrase that goes through your book, goes to all of your materials. It says it's 100% of the kids, 100% of the time. And we probably would all check that box and say, yes, that's what we should do. But I also wonder, what's that mean for different people when I hear that? So what does 100% of the kids, 100% of the time really mean for you?
Yeah, for me, 100% of the kids, 100% of the time means that every child who goes through our door, we are going to work as hard as we can to do what that child needs. And what that child needs is different than the child next to them, and is different to the child next to them. And so we have to make sure that first and foremost, we've built the relationship with that child and that family to understand what those needs truly are. Because if we don't understand what the needs are, then we're going to apply the same expectation to all kids and the same goals to all kids. And we just can't do that. We couldn't do it 50 years ago. We couldn't do it 20 years ago. We certainly can't do it today. And you may have 25 kids in your classroom, and that means they have 25 different needs. Not all of our kids are going to go to college. The worst thing we did in the 90s was that in order to be successful in life, every kid must go to college, right?
Yep. Yeah.
That was the message. And we know in 2022 that message was wrong. And so what we need to do now is figure out where are the strengths and attributes in each of our children, and how can they build on those attributes to be successful. And we have to know that every child is unique and different, and a test that measures performance and growth is just a measure. But we have to go beyond that, because there's going to be lots of other ways we can measure the needs that kids have. And I'll never forget the special education director that I had when I was a principal would come into meetings, and he would tell these families, tell these teachers, tell our teams that the number one or the best label we can give a child is his or her name. And to me, that's a really profound statement when we think about what does each individual need. Because we often talk about subgroups, and we group kids, right, based on race or ethnicity or eligibility area in special education or LGBTQ. And we create all these wonderful labels But behind all those labels are faces, and those faces all have names. And so do we make sure that every day we're looking these kiddos in the eyes and saying, we're going to make sure that we do everything we can to help you not only succeed, but thrive in life?
Yeah. So I love that explanation. The schools that we work with across the country at Magnify Learning, when they have some kind of a mission statement that's close to this, 100% of the kids, 100% of the time, or whatever we can, every kid, whatever we can, we seem to be striving for excellence, right? But do you get pushback sometimes that's too idealistic? Well, Adam, surely we can't reach all the kids all the time, right? Like, what do you say to that? Because I think we come across that sometimes in a training, right? There's somebody in the back of the room with their arms crossed and they say, well, I get it in theory, but tomorrow I've got kids. What do I do?
Yeah,
What do you say to those teachers?
So I really, honestly, I put up the picture of my 3 kids and say, okay, which kid are you going to say, sorry, we can't help you today?
Yeah.
Like, and maybe it's my age, maybe it's my passion, maybe it's a combination of all of those things. But I'm really at a place in education where it's like, no, like that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
Every kid deserves the very best. So, okay, here's my 3 kids. Which one are you not going to help today?
Yeah, right. It's like, I dare you to point to that one, right? And it's like, but from there, it's like, once we agree on that though, right? Now we can start to problem solve, think critically, look at our systems, our structures, right? Is that where you're pointing people towards?
Absolutely. And it's every kid every day, right? 100% of the kids, 100% of the time. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't all get the same things, because they all need something different. And so we have to look at the structures we have in place and the systems that we have in place. So a lot of times I'll work with superintendents, school boards, and principals, and I'll ask them, what are their goals? And they may have a strategic plan. They may not have a strategic plan. They may have a plan on a page. They may have portrait of a graduate, whatever the right thing is right now. I'm putting those in air quotes.
Yeah, it's good. You have to tell those. It's all audio. So you got to tell us when you're in air quotes.
But then I ask, okay, so how have you organized your resources to match those goals? If you think about a triangle, your number one goal is at the tip of your triangle, and you can continue down till you get to the base. And so let's say you have 5 goals. The 5th goal is on the base. You need an inverted triangle next to it, where the base of the triangle is now on top. And that's your number one set of resources that matches the goal. And so when we think about resources, obviously personnel always is the biggest chunk, because that's where the dollars are. We know that through staffing. But there's also resources in professional learning. There's resources in materials and tools that you have to have. There's resources in budgets, whether they're federal dollars, grant dollars, those type of pieces as well. And do we take the resources and allocate them toward the goals? Or do we just create these goals and then we run our resources business as usual? Typically, that's what we see. We see, here's the goals we're going to accomplish, but we don't take a look at our resources and make sure that we're putting most of our resources with our most important goal. Our second most important goal goes with our second most largest bank of resources. So we have to realign how we do business across education altogether. Because if we don't identify what the resources are to match those goals, then we're really just doing lip service in completing a task of a strategic plan, a plan on a page, a portrait of a graduate. We have to make sure that we're taking that system and going across all measures so that we have a really succinct, unified plan on here's how we're going to make it happen.
Yeah, I like that. Putting them next to each other and saying, hey, are we really going to do this? Because if we are, the resources have to match the goals. I'm sure there's some wake-up calls there as you're working with school leaders that maybe they're not always aligned, right?
They are. And to me, this is where we can take the business finance part of our world and apply it into education, right? There's other things in the business finance world that we don't want to apply to education, but this is really a leadership tactic that goes across the board, right? All great leaders ensure that they have the resources necessary to get the job done.
Right. And I like that because I love to read broadly, right? So I read outside of education a lot on the business side of things. And I encourage leaders to do that for that exact reason. It's putting a CEO into the superintendent spot is not really going to be the answer, but there's definitely some ideas that waterfall in, right? And that's definitely one of them. If you're an entrepreneur, you're going to put your money where you really want to hit that goal, right? So are we doing that in education? I like that connection. So let's get into your book a little bit, Adam. So the Instructional Change Agent, 48 Ways to Be the Leader Your School Needs. And my mentor is Dan Miller. He wrote 48 Days to the Work You Love. He did the foreword of the book. So he would love the subtitle of your book. He's like, 48 days always lands with him. 48 always shows up. But you got 48 ways, just practical ways. And I love your table of contents because you could probably skip around, right, and figure out where you want to go. So with project-based learning kind of being near and dear to the podcast and the leaders that are listening, I immediately went to community partners. Right. Mm-hmm. So Way 42 is a community advisor team. So I think that might be our favorite. So can you talk a little bit about, for our listener, what is that community advisory team? How does that work with schools?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we know is that the work that's happening now in PK-12 education is really the start of a pipeline. And as we look at the workforce and where we need our workforce to grow, there's really one of the 4 E's: employment, enlistment, enrollment, entrepreneurship. So as students matriculate through the system and as they prepare to leave PK-12, they have options. They could go into enlistment, any of our armed services.
Yep.
They have the opportunity to go into enrollment, 2-year, 4-year trade skills. They have the opportunity to go straight into employment. I always put a little asterisk by employment because we want to have them go into employment in high wage, high demand certification areas like welding, CNA, CNC, automotive. And then the 4th E is entrepreneurship, right? That is a viable pipeline. And so as we think about the work that we're doing in PK-12, all of our students should matriculate to one of those 4 pipelines. They don't have to be married to it. They can move in between. They could be doing 2 at the same time, but we need to be thinking every child is going to move into these areas. So the community advisory team comes into play where we find representatives that represent those 4 areas. So if I'm going to be looking at enlistment, who are individuals in our community that can help promote, support, talk to our teachers, talk with our learners around the armed services? Maybe there's a branch that has an office nearby and they can send somebody to be part of this advisory team. We look at entrepreneurs in our community who are successful entrepreneurs that would be part of this advisory team. And so we look to identify and build this team of, anywhere from 3 to 5 representatives in each of those areas. And so now you have an advisory team of 12 to 15 individuals in the community. And depending on the structure of your school district, it can either be each individual high school has their own community advisory team. If you're just 1 or 2 high schools, maybe you're doing this as a district or as an entire county of schools. And this really becomes an opportunity for 3 things. 1, they can become cheerleaders to help market and promote the work that's happening in schools.
That's a big
2,
one. I think we miss that sometimes, right? I would say you can either let the public tell your story or you can invite them in and help craft the story they're going to tell, right? They're going to tell a story, so let's help them craft it.
Absolutely. And my colleague, Eric Schoeninger, talks a lot about that in one of his books around the PR marketing components, that if you don't tell your story, somebody else will, right? And so this really is that opportunity for us to bring them in so they can actually see the learning that's happening, because there's phenomenal work happening in every school. Regardless of what state test score on individual schools, there's pockets of greatness. And so this community advisory team kind of pulls back the curtains first of the schools, so individuals can actually see what's happening. 2, they become partners and they now can help resource out. So for example, you may have a manufacturing CTE program and you bring in a couple business leaders from manufacturing who serve on your advisory team, and they now may have equipment that may be getting replaced by new equipment. It's a few years old, and now they want to make a donation to the program. And so now you're getting equipment that your kids can now train on and utilize. So they become a quote unquote funding source. So not only can they market and promote, but they also now become this resource where they can get material, they can get capital project items for you. And then the 3rd thing is they then can impact the curriculum and instruction. And so now we have them talking with the classroom teachers who are training our students and working with our students in these various areas. And now we've built this combination of professional learning for teachers as well as business folks where they can come in together and talk. So there's really 3 benefits in that community advisory team. I always recommend to superintendents or high school principals, we don't want to bring them in every month, right? Nor do we want it to be once a year, right? So find that sweet spot of maybe 3-4 times a year. I always share, do it in the evening, like a 5:30 to 7, feed them, bring in food, and build out this advisory team and send out an agenda about a week in advance with 3 or 4 problems of practice that you want them to think about before they come to the table, so that they can be thinking, okay, these are the topics, these are the things that we're going to be talking about. And then when you have them in the room, the first 15 to 20 minutes is about, here's what we've done since our last meeting. And this is that opportunity to promote and market the great work that's happening. Then move into these problems of practice, where now we're putting teachers and leaders with community leaders and starting to tackle some of these challenges that are in place. So I was working in a school district in Nebraska, and one of the questions that I asked the superintendent and the high school principal is what jobs are open in the community right now? Where are there gaps in employment? And they said welding was a huge gap for them. I said, great, what does your welding program look like? And the response was, we don't have one. And I said, this is that opportunity. Bring in business folks who are looking for welders, can't find welders. Talk with your state Department of Education, reach out to your career technical education programs across the state, and figure out, how do we build a pipeline for welding at your high school over the next 2 to 5 years? Now I'm providing this opportunity for real life learning for kids. They're going to get a certification, maybe in MIG welding, TIG welding, and then they can go graduate high school, have a job, and we're fulfilling a need in the community where there's job openings. Will those get filled tomorrow? No. But are we creating a pathway that in 2 to 3 years, we could start to tell a different story in our community? Absolutely.
And you've also changed some thought processes, right? And I'll tell I'm pointing to my head right now, right? Like we point the thought process of, let's ask community partners, like, what's the gap? How can we fill that gap to benefit the community and our learners, right? If you're a welder right now or a plumber, you're making 6 figures, right? Like, you're doing really well for yourself and your family.
Absolutely.
So that's way 42 in your book of 48 ways to be a leader your school needs. What's one other one that you could share with our PBL leaders that you think would really resonate with them?
Yeah, I think another one is way number 13, and it's know your 5. And this one, I think, is really important because it puts us in a place around, where do you want to be 5 years from now? And what we know about project-based learning is it doesn't happen overnight. You just suddenly don't go to a training for PBL and then poof, everything we're doing is PBL, right?
Preach, Adam, you got it.
Yeah, like we'd love to think that's the case, but the reality is it isn't. And so where a lot of individuals fall, and PBL is an example, there's others in education as well. We don't always have the vision of what is this going to look like 5 years from now? And then how do we backwards plan that vision? Because if we know that we want to invest in project-based learning, or we want to invest in rigorous curriculum design or data teams, whatever the work is, if we don't have a plan on where we want that end destination to be, then we're not going to implement with fidelity, and we're not going to be able to move from first order to second order change. So the way 13 is know your 5. And so there's 5 questions. And this is a process you can do by yourself. You could do in a team. It could be facilitated. But the questions are, what do you want to see your students doing in your classrooms 5 years from now? Mm-hmm. So the first one is about, what do you want to see? So it goes to the 5 senses, right?
Sure.
So what do you want to see 5 years from now? What do you want your teachers to think about as it relates to student achievement or growth 5 years from now? So the first one is, what do you want to see students doing? Second, what do you want teachers thinking about learning?
Yep.
The third is, what do you want to see students feeling about learning 5 years from now?
Okay. So the feeling of the student,
feeling,
the learner.
Right? Because that's who our primary stakeholder is the learner. So how do you want them to feel about learning for them?
And feeling's a real thing, right?
Then,
I'm either antagonistic about learning, or I see learning as a pathway to fulfilling my goals and my passions, right? So feeling's it's a real thing to consider.
Yeah. And I think, I've read a lot of Dr. Quaglia's research around student voice. And I think that's a missing piece in education across the board. I always ask, now I'm sidetracking here, but I always ask, are we doing things with kids or to kids? And that's a huge difference in education. And so that feeling piece has to be part of the equation when we talk about the vision of the future. The fourth question is, when you're out in the community, what do you want to hear people saying about your school or your district? So it's that hearing. What do you want to hear people saying? And that brings in the community. And then the last one is really focused on, what do you want to see your stakeholders doing And that's their hands, right? What do you want to see your stakeholders doing 5 years from now? And I use the word stakeholders very intentionally in that fifth way, because stakeholders is everybody that is connected to your schools. We can't just say stakeholders are just students. I think there are primary stakeholders, but everybody in our community is invested one way or the other in the work. So those are the 5 questions. It hits the senses, right? Like, what do you want to see students doing? What do you want teachers to be thinking about? What do you want students to be feeling? What do you want to hear in your community? And then what do you want to see stakeholders doing?
Yeah. And you're kind of futuring those ideas, right? You're futuring those out, see where you want to go. And then you're going to, whatever the PLCs, the instructional model you change, whatever the changes that you want to bring to your building.
Absolutely.
Love it. Do you have another one? Because I want people to get a copy of your book and I want them to be able to connect with you. But before we do that, do you have another one of these 48 that we could hit real quick?
Yeah, I think another way that is one of my favorite, and part of it's because I really want to make sure that when we go and we do things in schools, we have evidence to back up what it is we're doing. Like, what's the reason in making the decision? So way 22, it's super easy. It's called Feedback Frenzy. And what Feedback Frenzy is it's simply us going into classrooms and looking for something. It's not looking for everything. It's looking for something. So for example, I might be working in professional learning with my staff, and I'm looking to see, and when I go into classrooms, do I see 2 or more students working together? Right? Collaboration is a piece. We know the World Economic Forum's research says in 2025, here are the top 10 skills we want our employees to have, and collaboration is built into almost all of them. So collaboration becomes a goal. So I simply, as a leader, I go visit 10 classrooms every day. And I spend 2 minutes in each classroom. And do I see kids working with each other? Yes or no? Tally it up. Do it for 5 days. Friday, okay, staff was in 50 classrooms this week. In these 50 classrooms, 20% of the classrooms had students collaborating. Here's a couple examples that I saw of great collaboration happening in classrooms. Keep up the great work, right? No judgment. It's just, here's the data. Here's 2 great examples. Go week 2. 50 classrooms. End of the week, I was in 50 classrooms again. This time I saw 28 of the 50 classrooms. Here's more examples. No judgment, just here's the data. Here's what we saw. Do it again for the 3rd week. Go in, now we're at 42 out of the 50 classrooms. Continue to do it until you're at the level of expectation you want, and then you can move to another piece. But I think part of the problem is when and this is our evaluation system, right? That has done this to us, is we've created evaluation systems that are so comprehensive. And I'm looking for so many things when I go into classrooms that none of it is important, because all of it's important. So take Feedback Frenzy, pick something that you believe is going to transform learning and hyper focus in on it. And for 3 weeks, for 4 weeks, that's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm giving feedback on. And that's the goal. And I always share with administrators, don't start and not tell your staff, right? Like, provide the insights around, here's what collaboration is. Here's the goal. These next 6 weeks, we're going to really be intensely focused on collaboration. You're going to see me coming into classrooms. That's what I'm looking for, is just evidence of student collaboration. And then start in and go in, visit classrooms, but make the commitment to go into the classrooms, right? What gets monitored gets done. And so if we're not going to spend the time and invest going into classrooms, then don't put this in place. Now, I would also say, like, that is the most important job of the school leaders, to be in classrooms, right? Like, that's your role as an instructional leader. That could be a whole nother podcast topic, though.
But I like that. As I was listening to Feedback Frenzy, it's like, I like that idea that I heard principals had to be in classrooms, right, to do that. Yeah. And then I think sometimes as principals, like, we maybe don't get into classrooms. We're not sure exactly what we should be doing, right? Like, should I be evaluating? Yeah. Hey, that kid's not doing what he's supposed to be. Should I address that? Is that my job right now? So I like that you're making it very clear for everybody, at least in the Feedback Frenzy world, right? Is I'm going to come in, I'm going to look for this, I'm going to move on, and I'll report out, and we'll see where we go. I also liked, I heard you say you had to pick something that was really going to change learning, right? So you don't pick, does every kid have a pencil, right? And you're picking something that you really feel is going to build momentum and culture and really change learning for your building.
Yeah. My favorite is always when you see it on evaluation tools or walkthrough tools. Teacher has standards posted. Yes, that's definitely going to change student learning because we've posted the standard. Like
Right.
we need to really look at what is the time that we're spending and how is it translated into student achievement or growth. And that's where we need to spend our time and our energy and then create a system that allows for that to happen.
Sure. I like the intentionality there. So again, PBL Simplified audience, I want you to go grab Adam's book, The Instructional Change Agent, 48 Ways to Be the Leader Your School Needs. Adam, where else can we connect with you?
Yeah, a couple different ways. You can go to www.leadered.com. That's at the International Center for Leadership and Education. And that's the organization that I work with in terms of supporting schools and districts across the country. Of course, you mentioned my website, adamddrummond.com. You can get lots of resources there. Also on Twitter, my Twitter handle is Adam D. Drummond. If you don't put the D in the middle, you're going to talk with a really nice guy named Adam Drummond, who's in Australia. He does TV movie production. So we've talked on occasion because people will tweet him questions about education and he'll send them my way. So he's a really nice guy. So if you want to talk to an Adam Drummond in Australia, feel free. But my Twitter handle has a D for David in between Adam and Drummond.
There you go. So the guy in Australia might be a good follow, but we'll make sure we get the D in the show notes so that you're following the right person. Adam, thanks for being on today. Really appreciate it.
Ryan, thanks for the opportunity. Just appreciate the great work that educational leaders are doing across the country. I think now more than ever, being a leader is the hardest job we've ever seen in education, especially over the last 3 years. And just know that if you haven't heard it from anybody else today, thank you for being a servant leader and helping to change the trajectory of kids' lives. They need you.
There you go. I appreciate your positive message, generational outreach that you have. So you've heard a little bit from Adam. You can go grab his book. Keep the faith, right? Like keep going. Like the work that we're doing matters. Let your staff know that. You're thinking 5 years out. Adam gave you some questions to drive that as you're looking to bring PBL to your school. It's not a poof and it's there. It is a process to set up. And as you do that, you will engage your learners, tackle boredom, and transform your classrooms.